So we are continuing on in our series about transformation, about how God, when He comes into our lives, He changes us and He makes us into something different than we were before. Last week we looked at the transformation of Joseph, the son of Jacob. In that we learned that not all transformations that we go through and not all changes that God would have us go through are fast or easy. Some of them take time and involve a lot of pain and struggle. Joseph, through the mistreatment of others, went through many years of hardships. But through it all, God was using these trials to bring him closer and closer to the man that he was supposed to be. This is because God can bring good out of bad circumstances. Joseph said exactly that to his brothers when they asked his forgiveness. He told them that the actions that they had intended for evil, God turned for good and was able to save many lives through it. In this, we can also learn that God is able to use the struggles of our lives to transform us into who He has in mind for us to be. We need only follow the example of Joseph. At every turn and in the face of every mistreatment, he sought to honor God and live in a way that pleased Him. Not only did he continue to live a life of godly moral character, he also continued to walk in his giftings that God had given him. This means that we cannot use our circumstances as an excuse to not be who God has called us to be. We are to serve Him wherever we find ourselves and however we find ourselves. If we can learn to do that, then not only will we improve our position over time, but we can also maintain a positive outlook that will keep our hearts open to being used by God. The fact of the matter is that we often limit what God does through us by our own actions and our own attitudes. So we must take great care to foster the right kinds of both. Through our actions and through our attitudes, we enable the working of God in our life. God will accomplish His will no matter what in the world, but we can hinder His progress in our lives through our inability or unwillingness to submit to who He is and submit to who He has called us to be. Now, due to the actions of Joseph, he is raised to the position of vizier or second in command of all Egypt. And he uses this position to bring his entire family into Egypt during a great famine, and they settle in the highly desirable Goshen region. They stay there for many years, and they grow into a great nation. It is here that we will meet the next person that we are going to look at and see how God transforms their life. Here we will meet Moses. Moses is one of the most important figures in all of the Old Testament. He is one of the greatest leaders in the history of the nation of Israel. Now, there are two major transformations that Moses goes through in his life. So we will be looking at each over the course of this week and next. There is one in his early life that we are going to look at today, and there's one later on in life that we will be taking a look at next week. In each one, we will learn things about how God can transform each one of us. This week, we are looking at how Moses goes from a slave boy to being raised in the house of Pharaoh's daughter due to the actions of others that he had little to no say in. These actions that others took, God used to position Moses where he needed to be so that he could be prepared for what God had in mind for him to do later. Now, as I said, Moses was born a slave boy. But when the family of Israel was brought to Egypt, they were brought as honored guests. So how is it that they became slaves? In Exodus 1, verses 8 through 14, we get our answer. A new Pharaoh rises and out of fear decides that he is going to enslave these people since they grew so quickly that he became afraid of them. So in Exodus chapter 1, beginning in verse 8, it said, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us. And so go up out of the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. So the Egyptians were worried that the growing strength and influence of the Israelites, so they decided to strike while they had the chance and enslave them. This is why many years after the events of Joseph's life that we looked at last week, we find Moses, who just like all Israelites was born to be a slave. Yet God had more in mind for Moses, and that would require him to have certain skills that he would not have unless he had the right kind of upbringing and skills instilled in him from a young age. And he was obviously not going to get this as a slave, so God had to use the actions of others to place Moses where he needed to be so that he could become who he needed to become. So the people of God were enslaved, yet they continued to multiply. So Egypt became concerned. And even though Israel was enslaved, if something was not done, they would become so numerous that they could revolt against them. So they had to find a way to lower Israel's numbers while keeping their workforce. Their solution was that they would kill all the boys that were born in Israel for a set period of time. This would allow them to weaken but not destroy Israel. So long as they did not keep this up, it would slow Israel's expansion as a people and give them fewer men, so that if they were to try to revolt against Egypt, they most likely would lack the strength to do so. So this is the first person's decision that sets in motion what God is going to use to place Moses exactly where he needs to be. He uses Pharaoh's fear to institute a decree that is the first domino that falls to put Moses where he needs to be, which is the house of Pharaoh's daughter. He becomes so scared that he says, let's kill all the boys. So what is the response? The response of most of the Israelite women when they had boys was to try to hide them as well as they could. Yet many times it becomes really difficult to hide a child. So what do? God had other things in mind for Moses. The first person that he used was Pharaoh himself, to make sure that Moses would be placed in a privileged upbringing. The next person that God uses is Moses' mother. In Exodus 2, verses 1 through 4, Moses' mother does everything she can to ensure his safety. And God is going to use this desire to make sure that Moses ends up exactly where he needs to be. This woman takes drastic action in an attempt to save her son. In Exodus 2, beginning in verse 1, it says, "And a man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him." She hides him for the first 3 months of his life, as I am sure many women did. But then, of course, there comes a point in this child's life where he can no longer be hidden effectively. So that's what leads us to where we are now. So she constructs this small ark to put Moses in, places him in the river. Now, on its face, this might seem like a pretty desperate measure, or even a foolish move. I mean, there are so many things that could happen to a 3-month-old child in a tiny ark in a river like the Nile. Yet I think there was more planning here than just putting him in the river and wishing him the best of luck. We see that in the result. In verses 5 through 10, we see the result of this plan, and I think this shows that there was more thought put into it than you might originally think. There also appears to be quite clearly the hand of God in this situation. In Exodus 2, beginning in verse 5, it says, "Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.' Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?' And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Go.' So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages.' So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, 'Because I drew him out of the water.'" So Moses finds his way to Pharaoh's daughter because she was bathing at the river. This is why I say that there was probably more planning involved here than just placing the baby in the river and saying, "Well, let's see what happens." This was probably a known place where she did this. So it is entirely possible that this is the outcome that Moses' mother was hoping for. Not only that, but due to the boldness of Moses' sister, his own mother was able to nurse him and still have relationship with her child until he grew old enough to be taken into Pharaoh's daughter's house. This also shows the power of adoption to change someone's life. I know that adoption is close to God's heart. It's close to mine as well. We know that it is close to God's heart because he has adopted each and every one of us into his family. So we should show that same heart in caring for the children who need it. This is why, in fact, my wife and I have talked at great length about adopting later on in life. We're talking about transformation, and this is one of the most tangible things that you can do to meaningfully transform the life of someone else. This is the general benefit of adoption, but let's look at the case of Moses a bit more and see what lessons we can learn from it. As I said earlier, God had great things in mind for Moses and would have him lead his people. This means that he would need to be kept safe and be prepared with the skills necessary to lead. What better way to accomplish both simultaneously than to have him placed in the house of Pharaoh's daughter? She would keep him safe from her father's decree, whether by keeping the baby's heritage a secret or pleading with him. We don't know exactly how she got around the decree, but the fact is that she did. Not only that, but as a son in her house, he would have access to many things that a slave boy would never have access to. Rather than toiling in the field with his brethren, he would have been educated. He would have access to the finest schooling in the world at the time. Not only for head knowledge, but he would also be in close proximity to those leading the nation of Egypt. This means that he would be able to learn how to lead people specifically. Whether they were actively teaching him how to lead or not, he would have been able to pick up on things merely by watching. As one of my instructors was fond of saying, more things are caught than taught. So just being around Pharaoh and other officials would have shown Moses how to lead people effectively. Another important factor to notice here is that this is a transformation that Moses himself had no say in whatsoever. His mother chose to send him down the river at 3 months old to give him a chance at survival. And it worked. So he would have been saved from Pharaoh's decree, thus transforming the trajectory of his life. Then Pharaoh's daughter sees him and decides to take him in. We don't know why Pharaoh's daughter did this. She could have just as easily let him stay in the river or even carry out her father's decree and kill the baby herself. Yet she decided to keep the child and raise him as her own. This was another decision made on behalf of this child by someone else that further transformed his life. The baby Moses does not realize it, but the circumstances of his birth and the outlook of his life were completely and radically changed through the actions and decisions of others. And all of it was made to work together by God to accomplish his purposes. God desired to raise up a man to lead his people, even though his people were slaves and all the boys were marked for death. He was able to take this baby boy and have him not only survive, but be given a life where he would be raised to lead so that he could be who God had called him to be. There are some times that we also might feel that the circumstances of our birth or who we are or where we were born or where we've lived or any of the other myriad of things that contributed to our upbringing or have formed who we are out of our control. That things merely happen to us, and oftentimes decisions are made for us. There are so many factors in our life that we cannot control. In our childhood, where we go is determined by our parents, and we do what they want us to do. Decisions of others and forces beyond our control will always have a lasting effect on who we are and what skills we may have, or what opportunities are available to us. Some of these we may feel are positives in our life, like Moses being brought into Pharaoh's daughter's house was definitely a positive. It gave him privilege. It gave him skills that he wouldn't have otherwise had. It gave him life that he would not have otherwise had. Others are not quite as positive, like the decree that marked Moses for death as an infant. This forced his mother to hide him and then send him down the river in a desperate attempt to save him. All these things that are beyond our control can make us feel helpless. They can make us feel like so many things in our life are just happening to us and we are bystanders and we have no hope and we have no ability to change, and that the world is just going to form us into whoever it's going to form us into, and that's it. They seem beyond our control. It all seems so random sometimes. The good news is that none of the circumstances of your life are a surprise to God. He knows exactly what is going to happen. In the world, he knows exactly what's going to happen to you. I can promise you one thing. There are many questions in the Bible. There are many things that we don't know. But I can tell you one thing, that Pharaoh's decree that all boys in Israel be killed for a time, that didn't come as a surprise to God. The fact that Moses' mother would decide to send him into the river in a desperate attempt to save him, that didn't come as a surprise to God. The fact that Pharaoh's daughter would find this small child and decide to take mercy on him and take him into her house, that didn't come as a surprise to God. He used all of these things together to form Moses at the earliest stages of his life into exactly who he needed to be. What makes you think that he's done anything less with the circumstances of your life? This is not to say that every circumstance is good, and that if you're in a tough spot, that tough spot was ordained by God. I am saying that God can use your past. He can use your circumstances that formed you and to prepare you for a future with him. By Moses being raised by Pharaoh's daughter, he had the skills he would need to lead. By each of us walking through what we have walked through in our lives, we are now poised and prepared by God to be who he has called us to be. None of your circumstances are a surprise to God. Where you are in life is not a surprise to him. Let me tell you, God didn't hope that Pharaoh's daughter would take Moses into her house. He knew that she would take him into her house. God does not watch the circumstances of our life with fingers crossed and say, man, I really hope this works out for him. God ordains your path. The evil that befalls you is not of God, but he sees it and he knows how he can bring good out of it, to place you in a position greater than you would have been otherwise. The decree that marked Moses for death was a definite negative. It was a threat to his very life. Yet God took a look at that decree and said, I am going to use this evil that Pharaoh is committing, and I am going to use it to position the man who is going to deliver my people out of Egypt into the spot that he needs to be in. Pharaoh's decree unwittingly prepared the man who would lead the people out of Egypt. And the funny thing is, it happened exactly the way Pharaoh said it should happen. He decreed that all little baby boys be thrown into the river Nile. What did his mother do? She put him in the river Nile. But God said, I see what you are trying to do, and I am going to make something greater happen out of it. You may feel that the circumstances of your life and the things that have come together to form the basis of your life, the things that seem to be random and happening to you and around you beyond your control, you may think that all of these things are conspiring against you to destroy you. And that may very well be true. But the conspiring of the world to destroy your life is nothing in the face of a God who can take all those circumstances and say, I am going to take those things and make them place you exactly where you need to be with exactly the skills that you need to have. We are a people who serve a God who is so much greater than the world we live in. So don't despair at the circumstances of your life. Don't despair when you feel like everything is conspiring against you. Know that God can overcome everything. And through all of these circumstances and through the decisions of others and through all the different influences that the world can put into your life, know that God is still sovereign and still able to place you exactly where you need to be. God knew exactly who would be sitting in these pews this Sunday. You are here for a purpose. You are not here randomly. And God has a purpose that only you can accomplish. Because that is who our God is. That through all the randomness, he could bring purpose. And that is what he wants to do for each and every one of us. No one is exempt. So let's walk as people who have been destined for great things. You are not here by accident. You were not born where you were born by accident. You may feel like your life has not been planned, but I tell you what, there's a God in heaven who planned out everything and knew where you would end up and is still working to form you into who you need to be so that you can accomplish what you need to accomplish. And that's what we're going to look at next week, how God used these early circumstances of Moses' life to prepare him for what was to come next. But God wasn't done transforming Moses, as we're going to look at next week. And I think that the same is true for many of us. God isn't done changing you. He isn't done molding you into who you have been made to be. None of us are finished products. I don't care how long you've been walking with God. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how young you are. Everybody is still being formed by God. So let him do the process. Let's not be stubborn and decide that we're done and get set in our ways. Let us allow God to continue to form us and make us into who he has called us to be. Let's pray. Father God, nothing comes as a surprise to you. The circumstances of our life didn't take you by surprise. We may not have known that they were coming, but you did, and you already had a path out for us. The hardships of our lives, the struggles of our lives, the decisions that were made on our behalf, everything that was done positioned us exactly where you knew we would be so that we can accomplish exactly what you have in mind for us to accomplish. So let's not get absorbed in everything else in the world, but let's focus on where we are and who you have called us to be. You are forming each and every one of us. You have formed each and every one of us. You know each and every one of us. None of us are here by mistake. None of us are here randomly. We are your children. So let us walk in that identity, and let us allow you to continue the work of transformation in each and every one of our lives. I ask this in your name. Amen.